Login information is available on the district website. The meeting is also being recorded and will be made available on the district website as soon as it is possible. Community input is encouraged and welcome. Input must be informational in nature and address the entire board rather than one particular member. The Board of Education cannot engage in a discussion or debate in response, but will take the information for review and direct it to the appropriate district employee for response. Community input opportunities are available either on the district website or in person here at the district office. We have social distancing spaces available. Tonight we have nobody here for community input, and we did not receive any online emails. This meeting is now called to order. It is April 7th, 2021, and the time is 6:32 p.m.
I have a question.
Yes.
I think that a while ago, there was a letter sent to all of us by somebody that was concerned about foreign exchange students. I don't know if there was ever any response to that.
Yes, there was, and Lori can follow up with you after this meeting. Thank you. Our mission is to provide a safe and caring climate and culture in which we engage, inspire, educate, prepare, and empower all learners in partnership with their surrounding community to be successful in today's and tomorrow's society. Les, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Les. Now, could you
Scott Andresen,
I'm here.
Al Dahlgren,
Yes, here.
Zach Dorholt.
Present.
Oh. Les Green. I'm present. Shannon Hawes,
here?
Natalie Ringsmuth,
Here.
Monica Segura Schwartz.
Here.
Following cabinet members and staff are present at the District Administration Office: Superintendent Willie Jett, Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Education, Dr. Marcia Beisch, Assistant Superintendent of Secondary Education, Dr. Lori Putnam, Executive Director of Finance and Business Services, Amy Scalarud, Executive Director of Human Resources, Tracy Flynn Bowe, Director of Technology, Ryan Cox, and Media Technician, Paul Novak, and custodian on site is Steve Hain. I think I pronounced his name properly. The reason we're reading their names is because it takes a lot of people to make this happen, and I think that it's good to recognize everybody who's working late and doing those things. The following cabinet members are virtually present: Executive Director of Community Education, Adam Holm; Director of Community Engagement and Communications, Tammy DeLand; Director of Equity Services, Ellen Stewart; Executive Director of Learning and Teaching, Lori Posch; Executive Director of Operations, Gary Ganji; Executive Director of Research, Assessments, and Enrollment, Dr. Sylvia Huff; Executive Director of Student Services and Special Education, Carol Potter; and Executive Assistant, Jan McGuire. And Amy Scalarud. Where's Gordy? Gordy's right there. Oh, yes, we haven't, it takes two technicians now for us to run this thing. And Gordy, what is your last name? Say it again.
Scott.
Gordy Scott is with us too. Thank you, Gordy. Good. Is that it? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Les. Yeah, thank you, guys. It gets more and more complicated to be holding these board meetings. Next, I'm looking for approval of tonight's agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Al and a second by Zach. Les, can you please call roll?
Scott Andresen,
Yes.
Al Dahlgren,
Yes.
Zach Dorholt. Yes. Les Green is yes. Shannon Hawes,
Yes.
Natalie Ringsmuth,
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Les. Next up is the consent agenda. The consent agenda consists of non-controversial items that the board adopts routinely without debate. Any single member may remove an item from the consent agenda by requesting removal at the time the consent agenda is moved for adoption. On tonight's consent agenda, item A, approval of personnel staff changes. Item B, approval of monthly treasurer's report. Item C, approval of monthly financial report. Item D, approval of board policy 419, tobacco-free environment, possession and use of tobacco, tobacco-related devices, and electronic delivery devices, vaping awareness and prevention instructions, as revised, third reading. Item E, approval of board policy 424, license status, as revised, third reading. Item F, approval of board policy 427, workload limits for certain special education teachers, as revised, third reading. Item G, approval of board policy 516, student medication, as revised, third reading. Item H, approval of board policy 523, policies incorporated by reference, as revised, third reading. Item I, approval of board policy 532, use of crisis teams, school resource officers, and peace officers to remove students with IEPs from school grounds, as revised, third reading. Item J, bid award, McKinley Elevator. Item K, bid award, controlled entrance projects. And item L, sale of surplus and obsolete equipment. I'm looking for a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda.
I'll second.
I have a motion by Zach and a second by Scott. Les, can you please call roll? Oh,
I would like to.
okay, I got stuck here before, so can I get, then the motion and the second on the table are for all items except for K, correct? Okay, Les, can you please call roll?
Yes. Scott Andresen,
Here.
Al
Yes.
Dahlgren,
Yes.
Zach Dorholt. Yes. Les Green is yes. Shannon Hawes,
Yes.
Natalie Ringsmuth,
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz.
Yes.
Okay, then we have item K, bid award controlled entrance projects.
Yeah, if I could ask Amy just to clarify exactly what we're voting on here. It wasn't clear to me in the agenda. It didn't have, the agenda that I looked at, and I think it may have been corrected later, but I didn't have a chance to go back and look. It didn't have a recommendation on it, and then it had three or four different alternates. And I don't know what we're saying yes to on this. I know we're saying yes to doing the three schools as far as the controlled entrances, but then there was something about sidewalks and there was something about office area. And so I'd just like to know what we're voting on.
Absolutely. So those bids weren't open till last Thursday, and so we were still finalizing low bids and re-released the background sheets with that information mid-afternoon, just because of the timing. So the way the controlled entrance bid worked is there was actually 5 alternates. 2 of the alternates were for concrete work that were separate from really the controlled entrance project. That's something that would be part of our long-term facilities maintenance budget. Typically, when we're bidding a project, sometimes we can get favorable pricing by bidding those in conjunction if we already have crews on site. The way the bids came in with the low bidder on the rest of the work, there was a pretty significant spread between the pricing on those, and we didn't feel comfortable that The apparent low bidder with everything combined was the most economical option for those two concrete projects. So the concrete work, we are rejecting those alternates. We're not awarding the alternates for that portion. We will get quotes at a later time, and still continue to do that work within the LTFM budget, just not have it be part of this bid. The other three alternates, which are alternates 3, 4, and 5 on the bid tabulation, are for some changes in the office space. So all three of these schools, as we've discussed before, have very similar layouts. They all have kind of an outdated workroom type space that's more of a mailroom. That's a rather large space that really is underutilized and isn't very efficient. And so all three schools had requested that ideally we could retask that space into more functional office or conference room space. So the alternates are to accomplish that. We were concerned initially that we may not be able to do that within the board allocated funds, which is why it says an alternate. However, bids did come in favorably, and so we're able to do that and still be under what the board approved.
So then I would move that we approve I'm looking, where is it on here? Yeah, we get controlled entrance projects minus the 2 alternates for concrete work.
Second that.
Is clarification, are you pulling something back then, or is it as stands originally?
It's as stands. So if you look at the bid recommendation, it's
Okay.
to award base bid alternates 3, 4, and 5.
Okay.
Okay, that's that, okay. And that got changed.
Okay. Okay, so I have a motion by Al and a second by Scott. Any further discussion? Okay, Les, can you please call roll?
Monica Segura Schwartz,
Yes.
Natalie Ringsmuth,
Yes.
Shannon Hawes,
Yes.
Scott Andresen,
Yes.
Al Dahlgren,
Yes.
Zach Dorhold, Les Green is yes.
Okay, thank you. Next on to discussion and actions items. Up first is a discussion item, information regarding changes in programs and positions based on enrollment and registration, presented tonight by Tracy Finn Bowe, Executive Director of.
All right, there we go. Good evening. I brought company around the table tonight because the document that you're looking at in terms of the changes in FTE for the 21-22 school year staffing plan is a group effort. All of the cabinet members have been hard at work on this together with principals and directors in all of our programs and buildings to create the staffing plan for this year within the budgets available to us. You'll see on this document, it shows the changes in FTE from the prior year. The comparison we're making on this chart is to what was budgeted for and the staffing plan that was prepared prior to the changes we made relative to COVID-19 for last year. And so this comparison is for the staffing plan we made preceding the evolution of the Distance Learning Academy and all of the shifts of staff that were created after that time. But this would be the most stable way, we believe, for the board to understand the information. So you'll see that it will show the change in FTE in elementary based on grade level and other supports in the elementary schools, and then by subject area at the secondary level. Since the time of the 2019-2020 staffing year and budget, we saw an enrollment drop in our elementary students of approximately 200 students coming into this next year that we're planning for, and about 175 students in our secondary schools. So as you see reductions. Oops, sorry, thank you very much. The figure for the people reading the projection. So as you see those changes, much of the changes that we're seeing in terms of reductions of FTE are directly related to the changes in enrollment. At the secondary level, some of those changes may also be due to registrations by the students. So if you have specific questions about the budget issues, Amy's available to help us with that. If you have questions about any of the program changes, particularly in the secondary, that might have affected the FTE in any particular subject area, Dr. Putnam and Lori Posch are available to help us with that as well.
Al?
Can you say those numbers one more time? We're expecting,
A reduction of 200 elementary students and 175 secondary students based on current projections.
do we expect that to play out?
And just to clarify, we're looking at what was budgeted originally for this year. And so decline is what we've already experienced this school year. But because of all the staffing changes and to have a baseline and consistent data, we're looking at what was preliminarily budgeted pre-COVID. And so the enrollment loss that we're looking at is really the enrollment loss that the board, the majority of it. There's a little bit in terms of, one class size going out and projecting kindergarten conservative. There's a little bit of a loss that we expect to see potentially next year. But really the majority of that is that enrollment decline that was presented to the board in October already.
And did we attribute most of that to COVID, like for students enrolling in online non-district programs? Or does this include the online academy, the 742?
So this assumes that everyone currently enrolled in our distance learning academy comes back and stays with us, back to our programming. They've all been registered and scheduled. So the loss this year is a combination of factors. Some of that is students that we may have lost to other districts. Some of that is online schools, home schools, charter schools, non-publics. It's not to say that we may not get those students back, but obviously we are going to staff conservatively. We have to staff on who's here now. So while that looks like a large drop, we would anticipate and hope that when we do the enrollment report in the fall, we'll see those numbers trend back upward.
Scott?
Yeah, you mentioned the numbers will trend back upward. Is that going to change our sheet here, our full-time equivalency sheet?
Absolutely. So as we get closer to now, from now to the start of the school year, we monitor all of our enrollments and we would adjust staffing accordingly. And so we that as a one-time snapshot to the board once a year while we're in that staffing process. But this is by no means set in stone. This always is a fluid moving process. So, and actually we've made some adjustments and the elementary, we've actually added some additional positions out of CARES funding. And so some of these have already changed since this was put together 2 days ago. It's constantly moving. And so we certainly don't update the board as every staffing piece changes, but yes, we would certainly add staff back as those numbers increase.
As I understand that we had to notify some of the non-tenured teachers that they may not have positions next year.
So
Is that based on this?
yeah, so if you'll remember from the flow chart, the staffing process. At tonight's meeting, we give the board this snapshot, and as Amy said, it's a snapshot. This process will be constantly in motion from now until next August, truthfully, as we continue to get firmer data about student enrollments at each of our schools and registrations, and we adjust as we go. We have to reach this moment in time because the Minnesota statutes require us to do that non-renewal resolution at this time of the year each year, and so we have to make the best enrollment and registration projections that we can make, and then conservatively make that staffing plan and provide that non-renewal notice to probationary teachers that we don't have a match for. That will be, at this point, less than 20 teachers, I project, and we'll be continuing to work on that list this week, because as Amy said, even as recently as today, with some updated CARES funding money, we were able to add back some additional supports to some of our elementary schools, and so every time we're able to create that open position, we're looking at that list of probationary teachers to make sure we can find a home for all of the teachers that we would like to have back. So that will be going on this week. The next step in terms of that non-renewal has to happen next Friday. And so we'll be making those last-minute adjustments before that time. And next Friday, those teachers will be notified of their proposed non-renewal, and the board will act on that at the next board meeting. But we continue to hold open positions for those staff throughout the spring and encourage those staff that did get a non-renewal notice to reapply at any time.
Les, do you have a comment?
Does anyone else have any more questions?
Well, Tracy's going to continue, but go ahead if you,
Oh, I'm good. I'll wait till Tracy's through.
are you going to go down the list, or are you done?
I'm not planning to go down the list. I
okay.
think if you have questions about any particular subject area or grade level change, we are happy, any of us, to field those questions for you.
Go ahead, Les.
Okay, just for the record, the Personnel Committee reviewed the projected changes in FTE for 2021-22 based on current enrollments and registrations. We also reviewed the process for the non-renewal of probationary teachers as required by state statute. And we reviewed employment decisions related to Board Policy 495 and created a documentation plan to meet the requirements of that policy. Based on that information, I would move that we approve the policy, the whatever that thing is.
So this is just a discussion item, but you're giving it your blessing.
Thought I had to make the motion.
Next meeting.
Oh, next meeting. Well, you know what? A man has to practice.
Any other discussion?
Different subject, just for the record. Different subject, just for the record. At the last board agenda setting meeting, we did have a discussion and came to an agreement that on the agendas going forward, it will list, and I'm not picking on you here, Les, I'm saying that it will list specifically, if it's a discussion item, we're going to discuss it, but there is no vote. If it's an action item, we will be voting on it in this meeting. Discussion items can also be items that we will discuss but won't be voted on. I mean, it's a voting item, but it's an item that we won't be voting on until a subsequent meeting. So just to kind of clarify what calls for motions and what doesn't, it's a real easy reference on the agenda for that, so.
Okay, any further discussion? All right, thank you, Tracy and team. Next up, we have an action item. Item B is the 2021-2022 Compensatory Revenue Plan presented tonight by Amy Scalarud, Executive Director of Finance and Business Services.
Thank you, Chair Hawes, Superintendent Jett, members of the board. So this is a routine item that we approve every year for, I believe, about the last 4 to 5 years. By state statute, districts can, instead of allocating compensatory revenue at the building level, they can do a board-approved plan to allocate a portion of the funds on a district-wide level. The statute allows up to 50%. We have historically done 25%, which is what we're proposing again. And so in your board agenda is a background sheet that talks about the different positions and programs that these FTE fund. We're not going to go into each of the items because there's really no functional change from last year. All of the items are the same. The only difference is that we have less FTE to support. So our 25% allocation this year is about 12.3 million total for our non-special education sites. We don't hold back any of the compensatory from special education sites. Those by statute must remain allocated to special education. So that 25% holdback equates to approximately $3,074,000, which funds 35.5 FTE. Last year, that 25% holdback was able to fund 43 FTE, so that's a reduction of 7.5 FTE. The majority of that really is not reductions. That's not part of the FTE that you just saw that are being reduced, because our hope and our assumption, based on everything we know about free and reduced applications and the challenges this year, is that this compensatory revenue loss is a short-term, temporary loss of revenue. So we are going to use our CARES funds to supplement that loss of revenue. And so the 7.5 positions that are no longer in this set aside aren't going away. They're really just shifting over to a different funding source. Obviously, if we continue to see long-term reductions in compensatory revenue as we return back to a normal free and reduced lunch application process, we would have to look at making those permanent reductions. But we're fortunate that right now, we don't have to make a permanent reduction for what we hope is a temporary loss of revenue. Just in terms of general awareness for the board, in total, our compensatory revenue for next year has decreased $2,825,000. So while you're seeing a portion of that reflected in the compensatory revenue plan, district-wide, that really equates to about 33 FTE. We spend all of our compensatory revenue on staffing, and so clearly that loss of revenue would be a significant impact to our staffing and our programs that we could offer if not for the CARES funding. Are there any questions on the compensatory revenue plan?
Okay. So looking for a motion?
I would move that we approve the 2021-2022 compensatory revenue plan.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Al and a second by Natalie. Is there any other discussion? Les, can you please call roll?
Natalie Ringsmuth,
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz,
Yes.
Scott Andresen,
Yes.
Al Dahlgren,
Yes.
Zach Dorholt. Yes. Les Green is yes. Shannon Hawes.
Yes. Okay, thank you, Amy. Okay, next up, we have Board of Education Standing Committee reports presented by committee chairs. Board Development Policy Governance Committee, Monica Segura Schwartz, do you have policies coming up?
As Monica is looking, there is none from finance.
Natalie, do you? Okay. Well, you will, but probably hold on to yours to the end. All right, you're on.
So we met and then we discussed several policies of the 500s that are coming soon. Some are coming today. We have the 501, 3, 4, 5, 9, 10, and 20, 17, 26, 27, and 31. And I'm just gonna say the names here, the numbers here. I mean, there is a school weapon policy, student attendance, dress and appearance, et cetera, but I don't see there a reason to repeat them all while we're going to go to first readings to many of them. So that was basically our meeting. And nothing else. So, thanks.
Okay, thank you. And then one more report tonight by Personnel and Negotiations Committee, Chair Les Green.
We met today, this morning from 10 to 12. And the items that we discussed, one was received an update on administrative search processes that are underway right now. Also approved a recommendation by the superintendent to pay a one-time stipend to members of the COVID response team for the 2021 school year to recognize the extraordinary time commitments outside of their duty days during evenings, weekends, and holidays to address reports of COVID positive cases and contact tracing as required to protect the health and safety of the school district community. This stipend will be paid using CARES funds due to the extra administrative demands required to respond to the pandemic. We also, and I've practiced these, so hopefully they'll go again. We've reviewed the projected changes in FTE for the 2021-22 based on current enrollments and registrations, reviewed the process for the non-renewal of probationary teachers as required by state statute, and reviewed employment decisions related to Board Policy 495 and created a documentation plan to meet the requirements of that policy. Also reviewed the schedule for the renewal of the superintendent's contract and reviewed and analyzed the superintendent evaluation process. Members will work on revision to the process based on discussion with superintendent and a review of MSBA recommendations. Also, it was brought to my attention that Dr. Marcia Beisch is in her last school board meeting of her career with District 742. And I would like to just point out for the record that you have been an asset to this district. You brought a new perspective that I think was useful. And personally, you have modified my thinking on a number of issues that have come up. And I thank you for that.
Thank you, Les. Yes, on behalf of and the district, thank you very much for your last 7 years. You certainly didn't coast into retirement being here. It's been a very eventful 7 years. And when I look back and think about you in the last 7 years, words come to my mind that you have been nothing but professional, poised, and kind throughout everything that has happened in this district, in our growing pains and our changes and our raising the bar to performance in our district and our community. So thank you for your leadership. It was very well received. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. And anybody else?
Marcia, I'd just say thanks for the last several years. I think one of the ways to measure the success of an assistant superintendent is to look out there and see how few issues we've had over the course of the last 7 years. And things have really flowed well. And that wasn't necessarily the case before you came. And so even though as an assistant, you work more in the background and you're not as visible into the community and you are to the schools, but not so much to the community as the superintendent would be. As an assistant superintendent, you have a lot of influence and you make a lot of decisions and create a lot of change. And you've done a remarkable job with that and brought a lot to this district. So thank you for the last 7 years. Did you come in for the Roosevelt fire? Were you here then? So you came in with one, and then the one that almost got you on the last day out?
Yep.
Marcia, thank you very much for dedicating these last years of your. It's really been everything. You have done a lot for us. I echo the things that Al was pointing out. I'm not that sure how much problems we had before you were here, but I get to not experience that many here when you're here. I also appreciate the work that you have done in supporting teachers and working closely with principals and the whole work behind scenes to make buildings more the same in terms of working with the same policies, the same evaluation methods, and that alignment that we had to have here. I know that has been a lot of your work on that, and I really, really, really appreciate it. And of course, I appreciate the evaluation systems that you have put in place. Of course, I do appreciate evaluation. So I thank you for that. And also for being so kind. I was very surprised the day that I learned that you have grandchildren. Thank you for being here for these last years, and thank you for giving this to us, and just have fun and come back and visit.
Zach?
Oh, thank you. You're the person who steps into your position is going to have a high bar. We'll work to hold them to it because you set it that high. And we know this is a district with unique, complex needs, and you're going to be missed because you're well-liked and obviously done amazing work. So thank you for all that.
Natalie?
So, Marcia, back when we used to be at the city hall and you sat next to me, I was like, she's either shy. I don't know exactly how to read her, like right away. And then I had so many questions as a new board member. So you would constantly see me like going over to Marcia being like, what does this mean again? So the meetings were shorter, thanks to Marcia, and I didn't have to ask all my questions. When I see the way that your face lights up when you saw the little boy who was reading his story, I know we couldn't hear it last time, but just to see how proud you were of him, and that's just one of our many students. That is your heart right on display, and I really thank you for leading with that. Thanks for being here.
Hello, Marcia. I'm the new guy on the block, and you write the most comprehensive, well-written reports. I have learned so much from you. Thank you. Good luck in the future.
No, okay. No. Okay.
So what am I supposed to add to that? So I'm going to use this analogy. When building a program, a successful team, it starts with your feeder programs, your biddy ball, your youth programs. In this case, of our schools, our youngest learners. Marcia, during your tenure here, your commitment, your dedication, your passion, and your love for our students is captured with these key words from our mission statement: safe, caring, empowering for all to be successful in today's and tomorrow's society. So Marcia, the fruits of your labor will be felt for years to come. You might not necessarily see it, but for years to come, thank you for establishing that foundation. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you. You're going to be missed.
Okay. Oops. Thanks, Jen. I wasn't going to tear up, but I don't cry or cry. I'm a softie. It's hard for me not to cry. I just want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart. I truly have enjoyed every single day, every single every single moment in this district. District 742 has become a very special place in my heart. It will always hold a special place in my heart. I've loved working with all of my colleagues, all of the staff, and the children here are what make District 742 what it is. And I know you know that. And I've been going to buildings this week and walking the halls, and I'm going, oh gosh, how am I going to get this fixed? That just is such a, it's just such a high, and I think you all know that. And I'm like, I have to figure this out. I was telling Becky Estrada, I got to figure something out. And because I obviously have my grandchildren, and as many of you know, they just are so dear to me. But I also get a whole lot of joy out of just being in schools and being around kids. And so I got to figure that out a little bit. But I thank you for your support. I am a better professional, and I grew a lot in this district. And I just really appreciate you all, and thank you very much.
Okay, with that, our board meeting is adjourned. The time is 7:11 PM, and we are opening up the Board of Education work session. First up tonight is proposed revised Board Policy 501, first reading, presented tonight by Dr. Marcia Beisch, Assistant Superintendent for Elementary Education, and Dr. Lori Putnam, Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Education.
Good evening, Chair. Whoops. Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. Good evening, Chair Haas, Superintendent Jett, members of the board, and community members joining us via live streaming. Both Dr. Putnam and I have reviewed many of the 500s policies. Those are all under review at this time of the year and in the policy review cycle. And other members of Cabinet will be bringing some policies forward at a future date. The first policy is 501, which is the school weapons policy. And as you looked at the policy previously on our website and the one that I'm bringing forward tonight, it almost looks like they're two different policies. But they are not. It is the same policy. What has happened tonight or in the review of this is that we worked to really bring it into alignment with the MSBA policy. And so moved some things around to create that alignment, struck some items, and so I'll just try to walk through that to help you understand what has happened. So the purpose statement has remained the same. The general statement of policy has remained the same. In the previous policy, the discipline possession of weapons was item 3. In MSBA, the definitions is item 3, so we moved it. It seemed to make sense that definitions would come next so that as people are reviewing the policy, they would have a good understanding of what the language in the policy was speaking to. So definitions came next. You'll see that in definitions, the language for bodily harm, nature of actions, and with intent were removed. These are not in the MSBA policy and really seemed more in reference to physical assault or physical harm rather than weapon violations. And so that's also why those were struck and removed. Then in the policy brought forward, you'll see that discipline is moved to section 5. Exceptions is next, and I'll speak to discipline that section in item 5. Under item 4, exceptions, I don't believe there are any changes. Then in section 5, consequences for student weapon or use and the consequences which begin on page 2. or the discipline as it's entitled there. And so in section 5, the consequences really are outlined in our code of conduct. And so that's or noted there, and then a link to the code of conduct is referenced in the policy because it's very clearly laid out in our code of conduct what the consequences are for student possession. Then the language there pursuant to Minnesota law was in our previous policy. It's just been moved, as well as administrative discretion. And so those are now moved to item 5. Item 6, consequences for weapon possession used by non-students. There are no changes. So I will open it up to the floor to see if there are any questions or comments regarding this policy, these policy changes, recommendations.
Al?
Marcia, I know we talked earlier today about some things, so I'm not.
Okay.
But the one thing that I would ask, and it's not one of the things that's being changed here, but if you could take a look again at exceptions, item A, and finds a weapon on the way to school, who discovers that he or she accidentally has a weapon in his or her possession, and takes the weapon immediately to the principal's office, shall not be considered to possess a weapon. And that part, I don't think that they should be considered to
Sure.
possess a weapon, but it almost sounds like we're encouraging them, if they find a weapon on their way to school, we're encouraging them to bring that weapon to school.
Right.
And I think that it should be clarified that our preference is leave it and notify someone. Not have a 4th grader pick up a gun and carry it into the school and create mass confusion as they're doing so. So somehow if we could, the penalty part is right. If the student does the right thing with the weapon,
Right.
then there shouldn't be a penalty. But the way it's written, it sounds like we're encouraging that student to, if you find any kind of weapon, bring it to the school. And I don't think we want to say that. So somehow clarify that.
Sure, we can take a look at that.
Les?
I personally think the policy should strike references for anything a student should do if they find a weapon anywhere that has them pick it up or do anything with it other than notify authorities. If that happens to be a loaded firearm and it's a 4th grader, I mean, you're right, we're in serious trouble. So the policy would be leave it there, notify the authorities or any adult that's close by, but never touch it. I think would be a way to just start that. Just don't even touch it. I think I think Al's right. If it says to a 4th grader, I'm supposed to pick this gun up and take it to my teacher or the principal, it's a bad idea. So that's end of comment.
We definitely can take a look at that language and make some changes for the second reading.
The other was accidentally find a weapon. And I guess we have the definitions there, but well, I'll leave that one be. I think if it's an accident and they do what they're supposed to do with it, I think the policy's clear. It's no problem.
Okay, good comments. Anybody else? Okay, thank you. Next up, proposed revised board policy 503, first reading, student attendance. Again, presented by Dr. Marcia Weiss, a superintendent of elementary education, and Dr. Lori Putnam, assistant superintendent for secondary education.
So policy 503, student attendance, there are just a few changes. If you'll go to page 503.3, and again, we work to align the policy policy with the MSBA language, and so you'll see some additional language there. And it used to just say court appearances. And so we added the language to say by family or personal action. Item 10, the language talked about impassable roads or inclement weather only. And the MSBA language talked about any sort of physical emergency conditions, such as fire, flood, storm, and so on. So for storms seem to encompass the inclement weather road condition, and so that language seemed more encompassing than just speaking to inclement weather and impassable roads. Then number 14, the language used to speak specifically just to tournament play. However, we decided to go with the MSBA language, which talks about official school field trip or other school-sponsored event or outing. And that implies that would be tournament play because it's an official school-sponsored event or outing. So that encompasses that. And then on page 5035, the items 1 and 2 is language that was added, that was a part of MSBA, and it talks about consequences of unexcused absences. Absences resulting from official suspension will be handled in accordance with the Pupil Fair Dismissal Act, and so it's important to add that language, as well as language indicating that days during which a student is suspended from school shall not be counted in a student's total accumulated unexcused absences. And then you'll see under item 4, number 2, we just struck the language, other consequences may be applied as deemed appropriate by the administrator. We took off the examples just because we didn't think it was necessary to leave that language in there. On page 6, it talks about unexcused tardiness. And MSBA actually wanted you to put the number of tardies in there. We just went with consequences of tardiness may include detention. We have learned that in working with the county that they don't always look to tardies anymore. They look to more to absences. And so we decided it was not important to keep the language that in addition 5 unexcused tardies are equivalent to 1 excused absence because the county does not look at tardies as being equivalent to an absence. And so it just didn't seem to make sense for us to keep that language in the policy. Al?
I had a question on B there as to why we, so on to include examples, we struck the examples, and I'm wondering why we wouldn't say consequences of tardiness may be applied as deemed appropriate by administrator.
Oh. Okay. Do you want to repeat what you just said?
I said may be applied as deemed appropriate by administrator or by administration.
Okay. Thank you. What would that mean? So, the language says it could include detention. What this language is saying that Al's suggesting just says that it could be any sort of consequence that the administrator would deem appropriate. It could be detention. It could be that the administrator may determine that to do some sort of study, to have the child do some research on absences and how that may attribute to, poor quality in schoolwork or something like that. I mean, it allows just creativity in determining what an appropriate consequence would be.
Monica?
So I have a concern about the creativity. About the creativity of administrators.
Creativity of administrators?
Yes, my concern is alignment on like having some degrees of, what is it called? So I want students know consistency. I want students that they know that if something happens, this is going to happen, and it's not. And I wanted to avoid that one student to the next tell them or come to tell us they did this to me and I have to do this research paper, and the other one says I went to detention. So that's my concern about that.
Okay.
I also have, now that I'm here, I also have a comment about the one of the suggestions before. I kept thinking about that after a meeting. The number 10 in what constitutes what constitutes what does it says here? Excuse absence. So we took away the impassable roads and inclement weather to define it different, but it just doesn't sound like it just doesn't seem that it's more clear to me this way. So inclement weather is very clear to me, and physical emergency conditions such as fire, flood, storms is not. It's not that. So maybe we should look a little bit more about that, how to exemplify it, or to explain it better. I mean, what are we saying? That if there is a fire in your house, you will not come? Or if it's a fire in the school, you will not come? And it's excusable? It's a fire in the bus of the neighbor?
Well, the way that I interpret the language is that, physical emergency conditions, such as it could be a fire in my home, it could be that affects me personally. There could be a flood that's impacting the community, a storm, which would or could contribute to, it encompasses the inclement weather, but it could contribute to impassable roads. It's more than just about inclement weather and impassable roads, and that's why, we went with the MSB language.
Okay, I get that. Right, maybe it's just me. It's just me. Everybody else is clear.
Lester, do you have a comment about this, or?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I sort of agree with Monica. If we were to take away the examples and just say a physical emergency conditions that prohibit school attendance, because inclement weather is sort of it could be raining bad, but I think physical emergencies or emergency conditions that either, the words after that would say that would prohibit or something. That's about as much as I can do.
Zach?
Let Zach go.
Just want to point out, reiterate, the adoption of MSBA language to be more inclusive. So if a tree gets knocked over in the alley, that's why I was late. We have some wiggle room there. Inclement weather, we get that. But this is, to clarify, adoption of MSBA language, which they probably spent half a day discussing this one. So just a reminder, I looked through all their policy stuff, and I'm not kidding. This is where, I just want to reiterate where this is coming from a little bit. But I was in the fires, there was the wildfires. Well, you got fires on the south side, but not the north. What does that mean? Road closures. So this is more inclusive. I would say it's even a little more trauma informed. Because one time a tree did fall down my alley and couldn't get the car out. So.
Any other comments regarding this 503?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, proposed revised board policy 504, student dress and appearance. Again, presented tonight by Dr. Marcia Bice, Assistant Superintendent for Elementary Education, and Dr. Lori Putnam, Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Education.
Thank you. So policy 504, there are only 2 recommended changes. Under 2C, recommendation to remove the language of shirts/tops that expose the midriff and simply start the sentence at clothing that exposes. And then going to 3D, we added recommended language regarding school and team uniforms, making the recognition that those are approved by the school district and they're a form of public display and identity and unity, and that those would be not be used to promote any other kinds of messaging, anything political, religious, etc., and that any requests to change the uniform would go to the administration for review.
Al?
I have one comment on this one, and that's in the thing that we changed there, where we took out.
Yes.
I would say that clothing includes bottoms, so it could just say clothing that exposes the chest, breasts, or that expose buttocks and genital areas, or we could say tops that expose and leave the bottoms in. But to say clothing and bottoms is confusing.
Agreed. Thank you.
I have a comment about the changing the uniforms. I think there's a lot of teams that have, okay, now we don't have stripes on it. I mean, I think of gymnastics, and I think they get Leos every year, and there's probably other teams. And that's certainly not what you're getting at, but is that what you're implying there, or?
No, the intention would be that people would not be able to amend their school uniform based on a personal preference, any sort of statement, whether it's sexual or religious or political, that the uniform would be solely to represent the school and its identity. If there were particular exceptions, for instance, there was an exception made or a change made at Kennedy for a particular basketball game to recognize a student who had passed. That could be a temporary change to a uniform, but that anything of that nature would be approved through school administration.
Okay. Any other discussion? All right, thank you. Next up, item D, proposed revised board policy, distribution of non-school sponsored materials on school premises by students and employees, presented again by Dr. Marcia Bice, Assistant Superintendent for Elementary Education, and Dr. Lori Putnam, Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Education.
Thank you. We have very few changes recommended to policy 505. For page 3, under section C, and it was simply to align with the MSBA to give some clarification about what time, place, and manner of materials means. So there's a listing of those factors that would be included when administration would be considering the approval or denial of distribution of non-school related materials. And then the only other change was just a numbering change at the very bottom, number 8, but nothing changed in terms of the language.
Scott?
I'm thinking perhaps materials that the union puts out, that wouldn't necessarily be school materials, but do the unions have a right to distribute that on the school premises?
Can you guys answer that?
Hold on, Tracy? Hold on.
Employees can't use school time or school property to distribute union materials.
Isn't that implied, Tracy? That, I mean, if it's being distributed, you're saying that they can come to the school and distribute it themselves, but if it's being distributed through classrooms or something, it is taking school time, isn't it?
On occasions when they're distributing things or getting ready for meetings, they do that typically before school hours or after school hours. And and at times they'll use lunch periods, like if an individual member of the SEA or something is doing something for their association, they may use their lunch period to do some of those things. But I think all of our union groups have been really respectful of district time and resources in the work that they do in the district, and we've had really good cooperation and collaboration around that. So it really has not been an issue, and it's quickly corrected at times when it occurs.
That policy applies to distribution during school hours, basically on school time. How about school property? Does it apply there?
For union-related concerns, Tracy? She's muted.
I'm having a little trouble hearing the questions, but I think part of our labor relations work with our unions and associations is to walk that fine line between supporting those organizations to do their business in a way that supports their members, but doing so in a way that's not disruptive of school business. So, for example, they are not allowed to use school mailboxes to, stuff a union flyer or an association flyer. They really have to be thoughtful about how those things happen during school hours. And again, when there's been a special circumstance and an association or one of our union groups, like, for example, during a negotiations period, and when we know we've got an agreement that's been reached between the school board and the union group, and they need to schedule a meeting in order to bring that tentative agreement to their members, and it's in everybody's interest to get that done expeditiously. We have made arrangements at times to allow the use of, the auditorium and those kinds of things for union business. But again, I would just say that I think all of our union groups are really aware that that's an important boundary. And the times when there's any encroachment on school business or school time or school resources, that is almost, I would say, without exception, done in collaboration with me as the labor manager of the school district, and done respectfully and collaboratively.
Al, were you bouncing back in? Scott, go ahead, Scott. You're good?
So this one is kind of near and dear to my heart. I've always had an issue with distributing things through the schools in backpacks and things, either for-profit, nonprofit. Anytime somebody is given permission to distribute something that the kids are going to take home with them, it is an implied endorsement of that product from the district. And it bothers me in a lot of senses because there's a lot of companies out there that have absolutely nothing to do with this community that come to the schools and say, hey, can we get you to put this in the backpacks and take it home? And there's businesses that work within the community who donate thousands of dollars to the school district and pay thousands of dollars in taxes to the school district to pay for our function. And they don't come to the schools asking for permission to put a flyer in the backpacks or a coupon in the backpacks of the kids. And it seems to me like, that's what we have there is we have a valuable asset. We have call it a mailing list if you want. And if for example, for my store, if I was to try to send out a mailer to all families with school-age children in District 742, it would cost me a lot of money to find that mailing list, put those flyers together and mail it out. And for the district to just hand that service out for free, to me seems like it should be some form of a violation of policy, and we should support our local businesses who are supporting us. That's number one. When it's something like the union handing out flyers to kids to take home in favor of something, be it in favor even of a referendum or in favor of a policy, that type of thing really, again, shouldn't take place using district facilities. If they want to get it out there, they can, there's the US mail. And I think one other area that I've seen school or distribution of things is when it comes to school board candidates. Some candidates in the past have made it a priority to get out to the schools, like during the open houses and things, and distribute their flyers on school property. And again, I think that, although I don't think it's illegal, but it does, in a sense, imply that the district is giving an endorsement to that candidate and saying that if it's not a flyer that shows all of the candidates, then it's an implication that says that the district favors one candidate over another. So I think some of these things, we got to be really, really careful about what goes into backpacks and what's distributed through our schools, because the bottom line is, along with those flyers, there's an endorsement from the district that we believe in that message or that product. And it shouldn't be something that we just let happen.
When my kids were little, a lot of things went like karate lessons, but then we went to Peach Jar.
Right.
Do we still have Peach Jar? Can you tell me about that?
Yes, and I'll turn that over to Tammy shortly, but we don't stuff backpacks any longer. To share the guidelines for the peach jar distribution.
Certainly. Yeah, we haven't done paper flyers in a number of years. I'd have to check 4 or 5 perhaps. Peach Jar is an electronic flyer system that we use for all our families are automatically subscribed, and then if they get annoyed, they can unsubscribe. But it's a very useful communication tool because we can push things out district-wide, or if something's applicable only to secondary, we can just do those schools, or even 4th grade, something like that. When it's anything that is a district activity, event, or what have you, that is of absolutely no cost to us whatsoever. Anything District 742, our community education events, all of that is a benefit of this particular system. If it is a community or other vendor asking to be on Peach Jar, first of all, we don't have to facilitate that. It comes at a cost, but Peach Jar is the one that deals with them and charges them any kind of fee. But ultimately, we are the ones who say what can go on Peach Jar or not. So unless it is applicable, we feel like it is applicable. Scouting, for example, those types of things, if they choose to pay a fee to be on Peach Jar, that would be something that we would probably approve. But we're pretty tight on what we see as applicable. I also would like to point out that we have a lot of partnerships and with our community members. And so if it is a genuine partnership between us and someone in the community, an organization in the community, then we co-brand with that organization, and then it would be no cost to them. So I hope that clears it up a little bit.
Any other discussion on this policy, Les?
The first item under C, number 1, it says whether the material is educationally related. Does that mean if it's not educationally related that it cannot be distributed? Or does it mean, I mean, what is, the statement is just sort of standing out there as whether it is educationally related.
It's listed as the first factor that administrators, whether in building or in the district, are supposed to consider when deciding whether to allow the non-school related material.
Well, it says educationally related. And, because you just give me an idea of what that would include. One or two items it would include, one or two items it doesn't include.
So I would say it would not include going to Valley Fair. A group of students or families are going to organize their own trip and they all want to go to Valley Fair. I think an argument could be made for the point that, or the example that Tammy gave for scouting, that is, could be educationally related, that they might build on some of the skills or develop some of the skills that could partner with what we do. Possibly, you may have seen signs for youth hockey posted on our drive or the yards outside of our schools. Those sorts of things are examples that at some point, either recently, either an administrator, a building administrator, or a district administrator has deemed educationally related.
Go ahead.
Just some difficulty with that. Not with your answer. The determination about what is educationally related and what's not has to do with whether a kid would learn something from it. A flyer describing the value of education sent out from the President of the United States could be educational related. I think we have to be very careful with this concept and get more concrete into it in terms of what can be put in a backpack or what can be sent out under the schools, under a situation where the school is saying, yes, you can send this out. Because I think Al's point is well taken. If we say yes, then we are in support of it. If we say no, we are saying we do not support it. So if it's happens to be a Black Lives Matter or Justice for Chauvin, we're into some very touchy kind of areas. So I think we need to clarify whether the educational related and make it very defensively, like what's the book stuff, the flyer for ordering books at the elementary.
Scholastic?
Something like that. But I can see this going the wrong direction on us if somebody makes a request that we deny, and then the comparison one might make is to Boy Scouts. How educationally related is that just because they learn something? So I just think we should be careful. It doesn't seem as smooth as it should be.
Thank you. We'll take a look at that.
All right, good luck. Anyone else? Monica?
I am not sure that, so your point about distribution of other things in the property or other people like a candidate distribute, I don't know that is covered in this. I'm not sure that that's covered in this policy. Is that?
The what?
Like a candidate for the school board going to the meeting and to a meeting at the school and distribute a material. I don't know that that is covered here.
I'm saying my comment was when candidates for school board go to, say, the open houses and distribute materials on the school property for their candidacy. That's covered here, I believe. It's
How?
just
I don't see how.
Distribution of non-school sponsored materials on school district property.
But here is only covered by what people that work at school does, correct? Who can do this distribution? This is not telling people that do not work at the school to do anything.
I could see, I think under what the situation where Elle would be describing would be an administrator might have said, yes, you could come to our open house. So that's where that would fall. I'm not sure when you saw this happen, we've really tightened up who's allowed to come to our open houses. It used to be karate studios could come, or right now it's only education related. So for example, PTA would be allowed to come, but there aren't outside organizations coming into our open house and distributing materials. So if that happened recently, certainly, well, I would say Marcia and I would like to know, but I would like to know, Superintendent Jett, I'm sure would like to know, because that's something that we don't allow any distribution of political related material.
It wasn't in the last two election periods.
Les?
Oh, that was my question. You don't allow the
We do not.
candidates to do that anymore?
We do not.
Okay, that's fine. I get it.
Natalie?
I think, when it comes to the Boy Scouts, I think the caution I would want to say here is for our inherent not desire, what am I trying to say here? Like, we will accept the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts even though they're technically a religious affiliated organization. But I think if we accept that as educationally related, would we also then accept an after-school program, from the mosque or something like that? I think that the religious part of some of the educational materials gives me pause, because would we treat it the same way for all religions across the board? I know Boy Scouts has said, no, we'll let anybody in, but they still are a Christian organization. So that just gives me some pause with our separation of church and state. Yeah, and the YMCA. Yep, you're right.
Any other discussion? Okay, thank you. Next, we have item E, proposed revised board policy 509, first reading enrollment of non-resident students. Again, Dr. Marcia Bice, Assistant Superintendent for Elementary Education, and Dr. Lori Putnam, Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Education.
Thank you, Chair Haas. As you indicated, this is the policy that deals with non-resident student enrollment, so open enrollment. If you recall, 599 deals with in-district transfers within our district by our district students. This is students desiring enrollment into our district from outside of our attendance or boundary areas. And again, there are not a lot of changes, but if you look at page 2, item C, and this deals with standards that may be used for rejection of application. And C is standards that may not be used, for rejection of application. We added number 3, that actually should be highlighted because that is new. And that was part of MSBA language, and we added disabling conditions of a student, that would not be used for rejection of an application. And so then that consequently changed the numbering in section C. And then in section D, we added a language about the availability of the school district's enrollment options program application, and where that can be found on the educationminnesota.gov website. And I think that for changes to this policy. Any questions or comments?
Al?
Of course I have one. I read them all this afternoon. In section D, application, student and parent or guardian must complete and submit a school district enrollment. Does that apply if it's an adult student?
Section, right, we wouldn't, an elementary about an adult student. So when you say adult, are you referring to,
Saying if we have an 18-year-old student, they wouldn't need their parent to submit
No,
with
they
them,
would
would
not.
they?
that's what that implies there. I'm sorry, what, Scott?
How about adult basic ed?
That, yeah, actually is a good question, but that doesn't fall under this, that falls under community education. And so they don't have to, like, they're not enrolling into our school district, they're enrolling into a program, if you will. That's how I would best explain that.
Marcia, if that's what that says, shouldn't it say the student or parent and guardian?
Sure. So you're saying the student or parent or guardian? Yeah,
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
okay, we'll make that change.
Anyone else? Monica?
Actually, I don't have a question about this. I do have a question for Tammy about what was the thing that you said that?
Peach jar?
That thing. So that is an electronic thing to send stuff. So only people that have access to electronic means can access those materials? Is that what it is?
The Peach Jar is just one of the tools. So for example, an event that we are hosting that we want all families to know about would go out on Peach Jar as an electronic flyer, but it also would be posted on our website and go out socially on social media as well. So it does, it is received more than one way, but we do not do paper flyers anymore. That was a decision made some time ago for a variety of reasons, including the environment. So we do not print and copy paper flyers any longer.
So do we have any understanding of what parents are missing because they don't know about it? Do we ask for, do we actually check in surveys or something about events that to see if they knew about it or if they check other ways of communication often?
Well, I think, again, we do multiple channels for communication. So let's say it's an event coming up at your particular school. Those would all be electronic means, but we would also be talking with parents and families through school teachers, through school principals. It's any number of ways to get that communication out. I think that when it comes to school-related events and activities, it is that school community that does a lot of the personal one-on-one type of communication.
Great.
Can I add to that for you, Monica? I think it is.
Yep.
And so, Tammy, I got it. And so one of the things I would add to that, in the beginning of the school year, we make a strong push to ask families what is their preferred means to receive information, whether that's a text message, whether that's social media, electronic. And we do have some families who tell us, please call me on the phone and explain it to me. That's not very many, but we have a few of those. And so that's when we've given that kind of survey over time to understand how people want to receive information, and that is part of the reason or part of the rationale that we do it in the manner that we do. You're welcome.
Okay, any other comments? Okay. Next up, item F, proposed revised board policy 510, first reading, school activities. And same presenters.
Thank you. There are a few changes here as well. You will see on page 1, under 3B, that is not new language. It was just moved. Prior, it was under the general statement of policy. And since it's talking about responsibilities, we thought it fit better under number 3, responsibilities. But again, there is not new language there. And it's hard to do all of these things. So with the change, that just re-lettered each of those points. And then we recommended adding what is now G, and that's from the MSBA model policy, just asking the school board, saying the school board will ensure that funds raised for extracurricular activities will be spent on those. And there's an entire policy on fundraising that will be coming to the board in subsequent meetings.
From the current,
No, Amy will be bringing the comparison of the current board policy on activities and fundraising compared to the MSBA policy to board finance in the coming weeks.
Okay, Al?
the B, 3B,
Yes.
responsibility B. Students while participating in school activities will be supervised by district staff. Are they sometimes not supervised by designated chaperones or non-staff?
For activities? Not that it comes to mind immediately.
Nothing? Students while participating in school activities will be supervised by district staff, and that's a period. Is there, I'm wondering if there is a time when students may be chaperoned or by non-staff?
Example, a bus trip.
So there's the answer. You're going on a field trip and you have a parent chaperone. And so I think that would be a
That's-
moment. That's what you're talking about. Yep.
And those, they're not district staff, so I'm wondering if it should add or, staff or designated chaperone.
Okay. You guys understand what he's,
Yes, I just didn't think of field trips as fitting under activities, but absolutely.
And then for that G, the school board will ensure that any funds raised for extracurricular activities will be spent on extracurricular activities. To me, that is saying that if they're raised for extracurricular, we're going to make sure that they're spent on extracurricular and nothing else. But and this is where I was thinking back to when we added or when we moved activities funds under the board control, I felt like it was more, the school board will ensure that funds are properly accounted for.
Okay.
More than that we will only spend them on activities. And the intention is to only spend them on activities. I'm not trying to change that. But I thought it had more to do with making sure that things are properly accounted for. And I'm wondering if that shouldn't be added into that.
We can, absolutely.
Monica?
I also thought that we did wanted to assure people that if for extracurricular activities, there will be, so I guess there is 2 points.
Yeah, and I think we actually took it one step further, Monica. I think we said that if they're raising money for football, that it should be spent on football. If they're raising money for volleyball, it should be spent on volleyball, so that it would be spent, the funds that were raised would be spent on the sports that they were raised for. Didn't we do that, or was it just?
That's the way it is now.
that's my understanding, Al, but we need to clarify that with Amy.
That's correct, unless an activity is spending it on a general purpose that benefits all. So for example, National Honor Society might raise money and not just spend it on National Honor Society students. They may spend it on something that's for the entire school. But then there's a process that they go through where they authorize the use of those funds.
That makes sense. I think we can clarify that sentence, so.
Sure thing.
Okay. Any other comments? Monica?
I just wanted to make sure, to be clear about what we need to clarify. Because I heard kind of 2 points. So one is that or unless you got it. You got it?
I do, I have it. We have a clarification on 3B regarding chaperones and field trips, and on G, what is G now, in terms of the wording, whether it's properly accounted for, and I will get that through follow-up with Al, what he's thinking there, and bring back to the committee for review.
So, yeah, so in the G one, so what the suggestion is to check the language that we are looking at the funding and it is properly accounted for. And it's another point about being, if it's for being for the activity that it was proposed, that it was raised, is that a concern, or, because that's kind of what it says there.
I would say if that's, I mean, we have to talk to Amy and see exactly what our purpose is. Because when they came under board control, it was pretty specific as to what we were doing. So it's to go back and look at that and then clarify the sentence more than figure it out right here.
Les?
I think we should go back and let Amy figure it out, because we're not trying to restrict the ability of the National Honor Society to spend money on all students. And that kind of is what that says. So we should, that's the clarification that's needed.
We can do that, thank you.
Monica?
So do we have any, when people raise money for a specific thing, like what you were saying about, I don't know, the students that you said, do we tell them that they have to spend it? So you gave an example and said that they don't have to, that they don't only spend that money in their students, but they spend the money in the body as a whole. Do we have any policy or anything that says that that has to be done that way? Or do we have groups that spend, like when a group could spend money only in this limited group of students? When they can raise money and spend it only in a limited group of students, is that considered any place, or is not really considered?
Amy, are you able to answer that? I do not know the details of the board policy on fundraising activities, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and there's there's a number of board policies that kind of intersect here. There's the fundraising policies, but then there's also the student activity accounting, and there's a whole manual that the Minnesota Department of Education issues that talks about allowed uses for student activity funds. And the distinction really isn't that it has to be spent always on that activity, but the students who raise it have to be involved in deciding how it's spent. So that's really the distinction, is that if National Honor Society raised the money, National Honor Society decides how the money gets spent. They may say that's not on just National Honor Society members, and actually the student activity funds are the one exception where they can actually donate to outside entities. So if they want to do a fundraiser for the American Cancer Society, they could, and that's actually an allowable expense. So I would agree, I don't want us to write language into the policy that contradicts what the student activity manual that the Department of Education issues and says is allowable. But I can certainly work with Lori on reviewing those and cross-referencing all those policies and making sure that our language kind of meshes with the intention of what MDE has for those funds.
Al, and then Les.
Amy, then I would say, based on that, what's on item G isn't necessarily our function as much as just ensuring that there's an accurate accounting of those funds and that we follow state statutes as to how they are dispersed.
Les is, Natalie, go ahead.
I think my confusion is if we have whole policies based on this, why do we have to have G? Or can it just say refer to this policy if you want to know this information. I mean, like, why do we have to say it here when it really isn't about funding? You know, this isn't about funding for activities. This is about what is happening during activities, who children are with. It just seems kind of like out of place compared to the rest of the policy. But is that what MSBA wants here?
It is. It's the model policy from MSBA. And when I talked it over with Amy, she thought that it made sense to stay here, while the details would be provided in the other policy.
Clarification could mean anything from referencing another policy to deleting this to, I mean, you guys got to look at it and maybe come back with a little bit of clarification at the next reading, I think.
Les, are you good? You were? Okay. Anyone else? Okay, last up. Item G, proposed revised board policy 520, first reading, student surveys, presented by Dr. Marcia Beisch, Assistant Superintendent for Elementary Education, and Dr. Lori Putnam, Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Education.
Thank you. And this was done in collaboration with Dr. Huff. This pertains mostly to the work in her area. You'll see there are two changes on, oops, sorry, I didn't pull it up on the laptop. On the first page, there is the removal of direct administration to, and that's purely just to be in alignment with the language of MSBA. And on page 2, there's item 6, there's a removal of the word or. Otherwise, there are no recommended changes. Sorry, Al, where is that? Oh, thank you. Appreciate the catch.
Okay, any discussion, comments? Scott?
Just something in, how many people actually fill out all these surveys? I toss a bunch of them. My wife seems to fill them out. What kind of a response rate do we get on all this stuff?
Was the question, what's the response rate for the surveys, or how are they completed?
What's the response rate?
Okay, so we administer, if we're talking about parent surveys, then we are administering the surveys electronically as well as sending them home in hard copy. Usually our response rate is 20% or less, unfortunately, and that's despite many efforts of trying to reach families in a multitude of ways. When I'd say almost 5 years ago at this point, when we conducted surveys, the annual climate survey, we only had 10%, around 10% of families responding to the climate survey. And that particular year, the survey was done completely online. So subsequent years, we transitioned to making sure that we also had hard copies available for families. And we have seen an uptick in the response rate, but it is still not where we would want it to be. For this year's climate survey, which will be administered later this month, actually, is when it will open. We've actually reached out to some of our community partners and have had conversations with them in terms of how we can partner with them to have surveys available on site so that families, they could also support in that effort of providing the surveys and helping families to get them completed.
Al?
So this one here was kind of it's not about the changes that are being proposed, it's about the policy. And I would assume this is straight from MSBA. But as I read section E, so it'd be 4E. Tells me that the collection or disclosure of personal, so it tells me that you can't collect data on students and provide data to someone else unless it meets one of these things. It's for college or other post-secondary education or recruitment or for the military. unless it's for a book club, a magazine, and programs providing access to low-cost literary products. And I'm wondering where that falls in there and why we would have an exception for book clubs and magazines. And then curriculum materials, I can kind of understand that one. Tests and assessments, I understand that one. And then E is for the sale of students of products or services in response to school-related or education-related activities. There's something in here that doesn't sit right with me again about the fact that we can collect data. We can't collect data and give the information to anyone unless it's for magazines and books or the sale of products for fundraising. And I don't know how those exemptions got in there and what they're about. And maybe someone could provide some good examples where I'd say, yeah, that makes sense. And then on the next page, provide reasonable notice for the adoption or continued use of such policies directly to the parents or students enrolled in the school district and non-emergency. Give me an example of a non-emergency invasive physical examination or screening that's required as a condition of attendance, administered by the school and scheduled by the school in advance and not necessary to protect the immediate health and safety of another student.
Oh.
Because I'm on mute. I guess I don't understand that, and I'd like some clarification as to what we're referring to there. And no, this is by school personnel, Scott, so it's not physical. That would be by a doctor. We don't have any school physicians. But I mean, I guess I'm wondering what some of this stuff is in there for. It's like, those are really strange additions or strange sections to this policy. And if maybe at the next meeting, if someone could just explain to me what those are. I can't foresee any circumstance where we would have an invasive physical examination by district personnel on a student. That shocks me. But.
Yep, thank you.
That's all.
Okay, any other discussion? All right, that concludes our board work session. It is 8:18 p.m. Thank you for watching or listening, and our next board meeting is Wednesday, April 21st. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.